All right, so we're moving into reasoning and parallel lines, or in other words, converses of the theorems we just talked about. A converse in geometry means to reverse the theorem. So the last chapter we were talking about, if the lines were parallel, then the corresponding angles were congruent. This case is if the corresponding angles are congruent, then the lines are parallel. So basically the converses are how we can prove lines parallel. And we're using logic and reasoning to get there. So, and like I just said, if corresponding angles are congruent, then the two lines cut by the transversal are parallel. So that could be that if angle 1 is congruent to angle 5, oops, I didn't put a 1 there, then line M is parallel to line N, or if angle 2 is congruent to angle, and it only takes one of these pairs. You don't need all of these pairs, just one set of these, and we know that our lines are parallel. So if angle 2 is congruent to angle 6, then line M is parallel to line N. If angle 3 is congruent to angle 7, then M is parallel to N. And if angle 4 is congruent to angle 8, then, and not an and, or M is parallel to N. All right, so again, any one of these, if any set of these, 4 is congruent to angle 8, then because they're corresponding angles, line M is parallel to line N. And it is important that in order to prove these lines are parallel, we have to have an angle from each line. We can't just prove two angles are congruent and say, oh, yep, that means the two lines are parallel. They have to be specific. So this is what a problem could look like. Can we conclude that line M is parallel to line N? Justify our reasoning. So this angle is 118 degrees and this angle is 118 degrees. So they're in corresponding positions and they are equal. And so then, yes, M is parallel to N, and the justify your reasoning because the corresponding angles are congruent. And then that's it. We are just basically figuring out, are the lines parallel or not parallel? Why? All right, so then alternate interior angle converse is if our alternate interior angles are congruent, then the two lines cut by the transversal are parallel. So if angle 3 is congruent to angle 6, then M is parallel to N, or if angle 4 is congruent to angle 5, then M is parallel to N. So again, I have a set, and it only takes one set of congruent alternate interior angles that proves that our lines are parallel. All right, so on this one, can we conclude that M is parallel to N? Justify your reasoning. So on this one, we have alternate interior angles, but the one on line M is 88 degrees, where the one on line N is 87. So, no, M is not parallel to N. And that's because the alternate interior angles are not congruent. And so that's why we cannot conclude, or M is not parallel to N. All right. Now, this one says what angles would have to be congruent so we could prove that M is parallel to N and justify. So, M parallel to N, that means that these are my, we gotta be careful here. That means that Y is a transversal and X is a transversal. So we're gonna have quite a few pairings here. So we're gonna start with corresponding. To know if we have parallel lines, our corresponding angle pairs would have to be. And I'm like, to figure this out, I'm actually like physically covering up line X so I could start with line Y. So corresponding angles would be angle 1 with angle 5. So angle 1 congruent to angle 5. Or angle 2 congruent to angle 6. Angle 3 congruent to angle 7. Angle 4 congruent to angle 8. And again, the reason I'm doing those angles is because we want M and N, proof that M and N are parallel. So I'm choosing angles that are on both M and N. I'm not going to be choosing an angle from Y and an angle from X. Right now we're focused on M and N. So that was with transversal Y. But what about transversal X? So that could be, I'd need angle 9 congruent to angle 13. Angle 10 congruent to angle 14. Angle 11 congruent to angle 15, or angle 12 congruent to angle 16. Any of those 8 angle pairings, if any of them were congruent, then I could prove that M was parallel to N. Now, we also have alternate interior angles that we could use. Now, when we're working interior, our interior for this problem are between M and N. So these would be our sets. So alternate interior angles would be angle 2. Alternate from it would be angle 7. So angle 2 congruent to angle 7. Angle 4 is across from angle 5. So angle 4 congruent to angle 5. 10 with 15. So angle 10 is congruent to angle 15. And lastly, angle 12 congruent to angle 13. So if I have any of those angles in any of those lists congruent to each other, then M is parallel to N. I could choose any of them. So if it gives you a list and it wants you to say which of the following proves these to be parallel, take your small list and see if they're corresponding or an alternate interior angle pair. If they're either of those, then it proves that the lines are parallel. All right, one more of these. Now we're proving X to Y. So that means that M and N are now my transversals. So starting with corresponding angles, and then we'll move to alternate interior. All right, so at first I'm going to hide this one because I'm not focused on those. I'm just going to focus on here for corresponding. So angle 1 corresponds with angle 9. So angle 1 congruent to angle 9. Angle 2 would be congruent to angle 10. Angle 3 would be congruent. So here's 3, so corresponding would be 11 to angle 11. And angle 4 is corresponding with angle 12. I'm going to go ahead and do my alternate interior while we're focused on this line. So I'm focused on these 4 angles and we just crisscross them. So angle 3 would be congruent to angle 10 and angle 4 would be congruent, I don't know why I put a comma, to angle 9. All right, so now I'm going to hide this side and I'm going to focus on this side over here. So corresponding, starting with 5, 5 corresponds with 13. So we're going to have angle 5 congruent to angle 13, angle 6, so here's 6, so that's in line with 14, is congruent to angle 14, angle 7 is congruent to angle, here's 7, so corresponding would be 15 to angle 15, and angle 8 is congruent or corresponding with angle 16. They're in that same position. And I think this one kind of has more of a, where you could see the desk view here. I picked the front, or what would be the top left desk when I chose angle 5. So I had to choose the top left desk when I was choosing angle 13. All right, and then the alternate interior angles here come from this spot here where we're going to cross. And so angle 7 could be congruent to angle 14. Angle 8 could be congruent to angle 13. So anything on this list would prove that X was parallel to Y. And that's how we can choose angles to say this, if these are congruent, then these lines are parallel. And that went long, and I apologize. Until next time, 8th grade.